So the graphs are all essentially, and along the horizontal axis is days, and I've called day 0 as the 1st of February, or day 1 as the 1st of February. And so we've got 72 days updated yesterday. So there's 72 days of data, so the whole of February, the whole of March, and just under half of April. And the graphs are all logarithms of numbers of either mortality or infected cases, or the model that goes along with that. Just by typing in the worldometer death rate from Italy, I've got a curve that starts on February the 21st, with the first death, and has been coming up for 20,000, around 20,000 by now, and the curve kind of relatively smoothly progresses up. It curves over from about just into the end of first week of March. So it rises pretty steeply until the first week of March or so, and then it rounds off. But then it's that increases from 1,000 to 10,000 in about a fortnight, and then the next fortnight, the last fortnight, it increases from 10,000 to 20,000. So that's a really, really far from a straight line. So exponential growth, you would expect a straight line on this plot, and it's only a straight line until about the first 1,000 deaths, which is, you know, a relief because it would have been, you know, much, much worse had that trend continued much longer. So that intrigued me, because I thought, well, what's stopping it at a 1,000 deaths? If there had been, say, a 1% mortality rate, then 1,000 deaths would have inferred, you know, 2 or 3 weeks before that, that there would be 10,000 cases starting, 100 times the number of deaths. Why would the rate of growth of the disease start no longer expanding at the same rate when there's 100,000 people infected? The pink plot here is the UK death rate, which started just in the early days in March and climbed up. Very similar gradient, very similar slope up for the first several hundred deaths, and then started to, you could see these weekly ripples in it. So the curves wobbled slightly up and down with every 7 days, as I think the accounting for deaths at the weekend is added in on later days, or an effect that's like that. It comes up to just a bit more than the 11,000 that it was a day or so ago. But it's obviously the main thing is at the early stages. It's a good more than 2 weeks lagging behind Italy. So as I mentioned earlier, for each of those curves, which are, you know, just the numbers out of the data sets without any processing by me at all, I took for both countries, I took 660 times or 500 to 660, I tried a few values, times the death rate, and plotted it earlier time by basically 3 weeks minus the 6 days. So what I wanted to do is plot the number of cases at the point at which people were becoming infectious. And you could argue, so for example, you should say, no, the course of the disease is to death is longer. So these curves should be moved a bit to the left. But, you know, even a week doesn't really make any substantial difference to how you would interpret this graph. Or you can say, oh no, the death rate should double, so these curves should then be brought down a factor of 2. A factor of 2 is only a third of just under a third of a decade, so it's only a third of one of these grid line spacings on the graph. So again, it doesn't really make that much difference to how the graph looks. The simplest thing you could do is to model the initial part of the curve with an exponential, so the exponential growth that I described earlier. And the interesting thing is the same model, the same gradient fits the two curves as well, as you can see there. what we've got here is for Italy, we've got the blue curve of cases, and pretty much perfectly, I would say, apart from right at the very beginning, tracking that up till nearly 1 million cases, infectious cases, is the exponential growth. And then once you get up to about 1 million, the curve flattens dramatically. And the start of flattening is before the end of February. And the implied start of the disease, if there were, say, 10 people who infected Italy, was before the middle of January. As I mentioned, if you don't agree with the assumptions I made, it's making a difference of a few days to those numbers, not weeks. The UK has the same gradient. The data are noisier, so you can see that the curve kind of oscillates around my simple straight line exponential model. But I still think it's, given the weekend effect, is a reasonable fit. Interestingly, the deviation from exponential occurs, in the high 100,000s of cases, or certainly below 1 million, and then it flattens off. So the implication would be that the number of cases in Italy is settling out at something in the region of 15 million cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I wonder if it's worth just mentioning, this is one of Dr. Goodrich's main points, is that he thought that a lockdown couldn't explain this falling away from the exponential growth because the timings don't add up. You can see clearly the deviation from the straight line at around the, 25th of March, 25th of February.
That's about right, 25th, 26th of February, something like that. So it's quite sharp. It's quite surprisingly sharp deviation.
Yeah.
So that is the date at which they would have had to have been a lockdown, if that's the explanation for the change in the curve.
Yes, and
when
was the lockdown in place in Italy?
Yeah, so while you're looking that up, I'll just say that, the UK, the turnover is equivalent turnover. It's not quite so clear cut, but it might be around the 10th, 12th of March. Now, I would say that is the peak of pre-restriction economic activity, which Dr. Goodrich kindly looked up for me on Twitter yesterday. So I had this feeling that the UK behaved collectively with the most bizarre irrationality if people were worried about a virus. The government didn't do things that could damp down what I'm about to say. The press made sure that they jolly well vamped it up to the maximum they could, and people suddenly got very scared that in a week's or two's time there wasn't going to be anything in the shops. And what did everyone do? They went into the shops. They crowded into the shops. In fact, they crowded into the shops so much that I avoided going into some shops because they were so busy.
And what was that date?
That was about the middle. That was about just the date where this downturn starts here. The UK restrictions came in officially on the 23rd. And so we're talking about a broad period of a week or so before, week to 2 weeks before that. It was an initial slow upward trend and then a bulge.
The Italy lockdown started on the 9th of March.
Yeah, so let's look at the curve. So the curve here folds over on the 26th of February, by the 26th of February. And remember that if people argue against my modeling, they probably would say that, I used the word modeling, my crude analysis of the data, they probably would say that my blue line here, the Italy curve, was too high up, not too low down. And if you bring it down, and they probably would say it's too far to the right rather than too far to the left. So because the course of the disease is longer. So I don't think you can really push that date around very much. You can't get it to the 9th of March. And at the 9th of March, there could be a tiny inflection there. I think there's a gradient there and then a turnover. Just actually a couple of days before the 9th of March. But then at the actual 9th of March, there's nothing. There's just absolutely nothing.